just a word. So if you go outside, just be careful. I guess we can hear you talking just as you're outside the door too. So everything will be recorded. But yeah, so I'm Chris Erdman. I am one of the co-chairs of this group. I come from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So the other co-chairs are actually presenting, so we'll hear from them later. But that's Rory and Jens and Zhao Li. So we'll hear from them, and we'll also hear from some other speakers. I'll introduce them. But so first, this is a relatively new group. So I would I just want to note this initially too, that we're looking at ways to sort of prioritize our work, and so we have these sort of 3 key points to address in this group, and we're looking to all of you to help us with that. And so, first is address interoperability between these tools, leveraging the metadata in our infrastructure, shared infrastructure use cases. So pulling our resources together and providing guidance on how we use PIDs in various workflows and tools. And then a forum sort of, giving us a chance to walk through these challenges and work through them together. So these are sort of the key points to bring up initially. And I actually should pause here to say too that I see everyone online too, and I'm on Zoom, so I'll be noting your chat, your questions or comments there. And I posted actually our slides and our notes in Zoom. I'm sorry, there wasn't an easier way to do it. So if you can log into Zoom and find them that way, then that's the case. So I wanted to just quickly introduce, so we have some use cases that we're going to walk through to help actually with the brainstorming here and thinking about what areas that we can focus on. So first speaker is Maria Pretzelis. She's from DMP Tool from the California Digital Library. And Sonia Barbosa, from the Harvard Dataverse, they're first. And then Jens, so Sonia's online. And then Jens Klump also joins us from CSIRO, IRO, and he's online, and so he'll be presenting online. And Rory McNeil from Research Space, and Sean actually, Sean's right now. All right, Sean Ross. And then we'll be followed by Zhao Li, so the data site project as well. So, but yeah, I just wanted to, we'll have a discussion too as well. So we'll have a chance to walk through all this with you too. Unfortunately, one group that we have alignment with right now is like the National PID Strategies group. So it's very funny. I talked to them and they said they wanted to be here and vice versa. So it's really, but this is a group we should really work together with, because I think they're looking for the examples in our group and looking for sort of the challenges that we're working on. And I think really this cost benefit analysis is, or the work that they've done on cost benefit analysis is really helpful to us. But our use cases, our examples are really part of that, saying, if you work in interoperability with PIDs, you'll save time in this area or that. And so our groups are really interlinked. I wanted to share just an example. So as a funder, PIDs, from my perspective, were extremely useful. So in us doing our monitoring of how our researchers are sharing their outputs, we had to leverage PIDs, like they were just a necessity. And but reality is, like, tying that all together is still some of a challenge. And so at least in my case, I wrote up recently like how I worked with some of the PID infrastructure on how people monitoring open can utilize this infrastructure. The other case I wanted to mention is in this group, we'll be able to do outreach, about sort of particular examples that the community can adopt. And I just pulled some examples where I'm excited because this group, can be really a place where we can do this. But at least in my own life, I do this through Go Fair US and Fair Points. So, be great if this venue, if this group is really a place where we can gather and do this kind of sharing of these challenges and some of the use cases as well. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Maria. So she's coming up here.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my name is Maria Pretzelis. I am with the California Digital Library. And I'm going to talk about how we're using PIDs and DMPs together to connect data management plans to eventual research outputs. So I'm with the DMP tool. We are a free open source platform for the creation of data management plans. We're based in the US, so primarily we're serving US institutions, but we also have many partners around the world as well. We have been growing a lot lately because of new federal mandates in the US for data management plans and the sharing of data. So this has really put a lot of emphasis in sort of transforming the DMP into a machine actionable document that is structured and interoperable so that we can communicate all of the rich information that's in a data management plan to other systems. So it's not just this static document that you produce once and is filed away, but that it can really be a living document over time. So the way that we're doing that, the way we've really focused on that is basically what we call PIDifying the DMP. So we're adding as many persistent identifiers and controlled vocabularies into data management plans. So the idea is that this PID-enabled infrastructure already exists. We're not creating new systems. We're not building new technologies. We're building on existing open infrastructure. So this is data that we all own as a community. And so that's why this approach is really kind of important and powerful and also open. So it doesn't rely just on the DMP tool or any one platform. This is data that's made openly available. So in the DMP tool, one of the first things we did was to structure the DMP. We used the RDA common standard for data management plans. The second thing we did was adding PIDs wherever possible. So we have the new DMP ID that we worked with DataSite to create. We added RORs for research organizations, funder registry IDs, ORCIDs, the registry, the re3 data registry as well. And we're continuing to add new identifiers and PIDs wherever possible. So just a sample of what, obviously you can't look at the XML here, but really what we're trying to do is create kind of best practice rich metadata that we can exchange between systems. So that this is really the idea is that this is interoperable, standardized metadata. So one of the first kind of integrations we did was with Rory McNeil, who you'll hear from coming up. It was really exciting because it was like our first step into concrete exchange of information between the DMP tool and an external system. So in this case, we went from the data management plan into RSpace, which is an electronic lab notebook. So at that point, we're in sort of the active research phase. And then within RSpace, once the researcher has completed a work, ready to deposit into Dataverse in this example, all of that the connection can be made between the plan, the active research, and the eventual output. And the way we did that was through the use of PIDs, specifically through the use of DOIs. And Sonia will talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to show a video so you can see what that workflow looks like. It's real short. I don't know if I can play it or do you have to?
No, I think you can play it. No?
Here is a quick overview of the DMP tool RSpace integration, which facilitates linking together a data management plan and project outputs with minimal effort. Here I have my list of DMPs in DMP tool, and I am recording my research and storing the data in RSpace. I can easily set up the Dataverse and DMP tool integrations on the apps page, enabling RSpace to directly communicate with these services. I can then browse DMPs inside of RSpace. I can filter by my DMPs and public DMPs, and can select which DMP to import. Importing into RSpace will store the DMP as a PDF inside of a separate DMP gallery, which I can easily view, as well as reference and link to within RSpace. Now, here is my research data for this project. I am ready to export my work. This is a straightforward process within RSpace, as I can directly export to an external repository such as Dataverse. I will make an HTML export and provide the information Dataverse requires, being sure to associate this export with the appropriate DMP. After the deposit is confirmed, I can view all of the research data in Dataverse. Most importantly, a direct link to the exported materials on Dataverse is then passed back to the original DMP in DMP tool as a unique and permanent related identifier, which supports traceability and fair data. This identifier is also recorded on the landing page for the DMP. This landing page serves as a public-facing page listing all outputs related to this specific project. As additional data sets are published, these citations will be automatically added to the landing page, keeping the research materials and data management plan in sync throughout the research process.
All right, thanks. So I should have thanked Julie Goldman from Harvard. That was her demo, not me. So, really one of Harvard's original interest in this was the same as many institutions I work with who are now faced with new requirements, particularly from the National Institutes of Health, which is requiring that all funded projects share their data. A lot of institutions are looking at means of demonstrating compliance with new policies. So these kind of workflows are powerful in that we're not having any extra steps for the researchers. It's completely back end, but it creates that traceable link between plan and output that then an institution can use to demonstrate that they have followed policy and that they're in compliance. So that's kind of one use case that a lot of institutions are particularly interested in. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Sonia, who I think is online. So go over to her
Thank
slide.
you, Maria. Thank you. So I only have one slide to share with you guys today. I'm Sonia. I manage the Harvard Dataverse, and I work with the Dataverse project team at IQSS at Harvard University. So the Dataverse project is an open source web application to share, preserve, cite, explore, and analyze research data. The Harvard Dataverse, one of 96 installations of the software around the world, is an endowed generalist repository supported by IQSS, Harvard Library, Harvard University Information Technology, and the Office of the Vice Provost for Research. The Harvard Dataverse best practices include creating a customized collection space and depositing data sets and files within your personal space. Harvard Dataverse supports both data set level DOIs and file level DOIs. The file level DOIs, it's a policy decision per repository. There is community discussion regarding a collection level DOI. So users get to create their collection spaces that house their data sets and their files. And there's been ongoing discussion because a lot of organizations and institutions make really good use of their collection space. So people have been asking if there's a possibility of having PIDs at that level. There are plans to support the research organization registry in the near future. A couple of other projects that we're also involved in that are related to PIDs is that we're working with DataSite to explore multi-credential DOIs for consortium level Dataverse installations. So Borealis, Texas's Digital Repository are two examples of that, where each member of the consortium would have their own DOI prefix. At this time, all consortium members get the same prefix. We have one work in progress, which is to support TK labels as part of the Dataverse software, and we're still exploring how this may impact additional PID support. So as mentioned, with the integration with DMP tool, you can associate a DMP to an exported data set, and that data set will be connected to the DMP along with other project outputs. And I guess I'll mention briefly about the NIH GRAY Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, which Dataverse is a part of. And I've included a link in the notes to that because, I mean, I'm not sure at this point what additional PIDs we could probably support from that endeavor. And I'm going to stop there because this is supposed to be a very brief conversation on my part.
Thanks, Sonia. It's good to
Thank
see you too.
Good to see you, Chris.
So next up is Jens. And I think I have to click this forward for you, Jens.
Yes,
so
that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, just let me know.
Okay, so for those who haven't come across the IGSN yet, we just call it the IGSN. The long name is the International Generic Sample Number, but IGSN is much nicer and shorter. It's not just a label. It's actually an anchor of the knowledge graph in reality. And Maria and Sonia gave a good introduction of what that means, having the knowledge graph and having everything linked together. Next slide. The original use case came from geology, where the original idea for this identifier was developed by Kerstin Lehnert at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University. When building geological databases, they found that sometimes one sample had many names in the literature, and that made it difficult to ascertain whether you're actually talking about the same one and the same sample. And on the other hand, there are names that seem to be very popular for samples like M1. So there are plenty of M1s in databases, and they are anything, anywhere on the globe geologically. So obviously there's a problem with identifying samples, and IGSN was developed to address this problem. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what we have now, more than 10 years on, is that we have a persistent identifier. Since the beginning of this year, the infrastructure is run by DataSite. So you get a DOI for a specimen that you can describe with the landing page, but you can then link this identifier with the identifier of a data set where this specimen is analyzed or described. And you can, again, link this data set with a piece of literature where this data is interpreted. So in this particular example, you see this piece of kaolinite, a piece of rock, a mineral where optical spectrum was measured. The spectrum is part of the mineral reference library published by CSIRO, and these data are then used in geological interpretations of all kinds of mineral spectra, and all of them are linked. These identifiers linked amongst each other, so you can follow this graph between all these objects. Next slide, please. But you can also use it for tracking things around your lab or institute. So having IGSNs means you don't have any more mystery samples in the mail, but you can simply scan in the code on the label that directs you to the landing page and tells you what the sample actually is. Next slide. We've also used this in the field, applying labels with QR codes and identifiers right at the moment of taking the sample, and then using the FAMES app that you will hear about very shortly to document the sampling process and the sample. And we found that this gave us a 100% efficiency gain in the sample collection process in the field. Next slide. The thing that we come across a lot in introducing the IGSN is the question, why do we need this? We already have identifiers in our collection management system, in our lab management system. Why don't we need to reinvent the wheel here? But it's not actually reinventing the wheel, because these identifiers in your collection or lab management system are local identifiers. They're locally unique, but not globally unique, as we've seen in the M1 example in a few slides back. So you can't easily link them to the knowledge graph. Next slide. But what you can do is you can integrate your existing identifiers into the IGSN global network by the nature of the system of using prefixes and suffixes like DOIs do. And in this way, you can very easily transform your existing identifiers into web actional persistent identifiers. And Geoscience Australia did that, assigning IGSN IDs to almost 5.5 million samples in their collection by just appending their existing accession numbers to a prefix. Next slide. That's a quick introduction to IGSN. So I think it's now Sean.
Or Rory, right?
Both of us, yeah.
Or Rory.
Okay. All right. You have the power now.
Okay, hi everyone. Rory, this is Sean. I'm going to start, then Sean, and then come back to me. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about Fieldmark, which Jens just alluded to, and our space, which is, as you've already seen, it's a digital research platform. And we're going to talk about the integration that we're working on between these two tools, which focuses on reusability and discoverability enhancements, which will be enabled by the integration and incorporation of IGSNs. John,
Okay,
to you.
so yeah, I think this is me. So since 2012, we've been at this for a while now. I've been leading a project to develop software for field data capture. And this started in archaeology, although it's, I think we probably had most of our biggest user communities probably in geoscience now, and it's been used for ecology and oral history, ethnography, a range of things. And we developed one version of this we went through two versions of this software between 2012 and say 2019 or so, built in a 2012 software stack. And now we've, with a generous investment from the Australian Research Data Commons and a number of co-investors, we've rebuilt that now in a modern software stack, and we're just at the sort of public beta stage now. So if anyone's interested in looking at the software, let me know. But essentially what this is, it's sometimes a little deceptive to just call it an app, an application. It's essentially a platform that lets you mint applications that instantiate your own workflow and your own data schema. And that was done through XML definition files. And the old version, the new version has a GUI to help lower the barrier of entry and encourage sort of use of the self-customization of the platform, but it's still captured in a JSON file so that can be shared as an important piece of paradata about your workflows and data structures. So the new the new version of the software is cross-platform. The old one was Android only, but the new one's cross-platform. We've really worked on data exchange, the ability to do various kinds of exports from the software to get it into whatever your next stage of research is. We're quite focused on the data capture in the field. What we want you to be able to get the data out and take it to the next stage. Chris mentioned Open Refine. That is a common next stage, or for people who are using more geospatial data, it might go into a GIS. So we have various exports to facilitate that, or to target a particular database. We're working with the Australian National Soils Information System currently, for example, and ultimately we'll have a workflow that takes the data into that. Oh, and as I was mentioning, we've really in the new version invested a lot of resources into making it self-customizable with limited technical expertise. And I guess what makes this software different from other, primarily commercial software on the market is that for us, field research across domains isn't an afterthought, it's what we do. So we do things like capture multiple data types in the same record and sort of tightly bind those together so that you don't have, your geospatial data in one application and your structured data in another and your multimedia data in a third. It's offline first, absolutely offline, first, without the kind of compromises that some other software forces you to make. And we've really focused on integrating PIDs into various parts of the application. Capturing metadata at the level of the entire workflow down to the level of an individual field in the form you can annotate with quite granular metadata. And the incorporation of things like published vocabularies, the ability to import vocabularies. So we're trying to make this a tool that as comprehensively as possible incorporates FAIR data principles into your data at the time that you create it. Could hit the next. So I've only got 2 slides. So in the past, and I see Jens and I are using the same picture because it's got a helicopter in it. That helicopter cost a fortune, so it was very important that they cut their sampling time down. What we essentially did was, starting with the CSIRO geochemistry workflow in 2016, was we had to explore different ways of how do we implement IGSN into this. And a couple of approaches were taken. One was, do we take a Bluetooth label printer out into the, thermal transfer printer out into the field and, generate a record and then print and QR code IGSN and affix it to the bag that the sample's in or whatever, or do we do what they ultimately did, and you can see an example in the lower right hand corner down there, is pre-print a bunch of labels that are both human readable and have a QR or barcode on them, and then when you're making the record in the field, you just take your mobile device and scan that barcode. And that second approach, using like a little raffle book thing where you tore off half of it and put it in the bag, and then the other half was still in the book to give you a record, was the approach that they finally settled on, and that's what we are supporting at present in the new version. So you just the screenshots from the old version. I haven't made a screenshot for the new one yet, but I have it here, and I have the scan a barcode, demo workflow if anybody wants to take a look at that. But we found it extremely useful, and I can't wait to use this in my own research in archaeology to get an IGSN associated with a sample in the field to eliminate ambiguity after you've been doing subsampling and everything else and connecting all the data to the same one. It's been very useful where we've deployed it so far, and we're looking forward to deploying it in other settings.
Okay, so thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jens. So that's IGSNs. and FAMES, and you've already heard reference to RSpace in the first presentation. So RSpace is still often referred to by others, and we used to think of it ourselves as an electronic lab notebook. We no longer say that. We say that RSpace is a digital research platform which incorporates an electronic lab notebook and a fully featured sample management system, which are deeply integrated. The third component, it helps to connect with an ecosystem of tools. You've already seen the data management flow that's supported by DMP tool and repositories. In addition to RSpace, connects with lots of other things, including data storage facilities, both institutional as well as open source, as well as commercial, as well as specialist tools like PIRAT, which is a colony management system, Cluster Market, which is an equipment management system, things like Protocols.io. And one of the things we're really excited about at the moment is the integration with FAMES. So that is a very brief introduction to RSpace. So the FieldMark, the RSpace workflow really builds on what Sean was describing, collecting data in the field through FieldMark. That used to be called FAMES, now it's called FieldMark. I'm going to play a brief video in a moment, which will kind of take you through how this is going to work in practice, which I think will bring it home. But it involves some pre-configuration of RSpace to support the templates that will be deployed in FAMES. And then FAMES is used to record the data, collect the data in the field, as you saw Sean described. When you return to connectivity, syncing takes place, and then the synchronized data, including IGSNs, and that's really one of the focuses of what we're both doing, is then passed to RSpace. And then when it's in RSpace, it can do all the things that RSpace can do. You can put it into a sample management system. You can analyze the samples. You can associate them with your experimental data, and then at the end, you can export that to a repository. Again, all in support of FAIR principles and FAIR workflows.
One more time.
One more thing, and now we'll have the video.
With a product called FAMES. So FAMES is an Australian initiative to build a series of tools for helping individuals who are performing field work to collect information about samples. But it's particularly useful for collecting sample data in the context of an area that has no internet connectivity. So what I've done here is I previously built a workflow called the field collection of soil samples, and I used that workflow to create a new empty document here. And you can see that this document has a number of different fields arranged in a specific order. We're asking the user for a collection date, a collection time, the GPR coordinates of the site. We're asking for some images of the field site, the number of samples collected. We then ask for images of the tubes that the samples were placed into. We ask the user for transmit details that tell us about how the samples were treated, handled, and what the chain of custody was while they were being moved from one location to another. And also we asked them here for the listing in the RSpace inventory system of where the raw unprocessed samples are currently located. And then also we asked the user to list the DNA samples that have been extracted from those raw samples. We have a fairly straightforward workflow, and this is very easy to perform in the lab. But what if you're in a situation where you don't have access to the internet, so you can't fill in this detail in real time? You don't have to muck around using some intermediate where you record it on paper or perhaps to a Word file somehow, and then can't transport it back to you. And then if you're lucky, you'll be able to then maybe add the metadata back in manually. A better way to do this is to work with the FAMES tool that our colleagues have helped us build here for this specific purpose. So what I'm going to do now is look for, in here, I have a series of images that will help illustrate this. So what we have here, this, by the way, is a prompt to help you locate the FAMES website. It's an Australian initiative, as I mentioned. And then here we can see the template that our colleagues at FAMES have built for us. This is a tool that will be used on Android that could be used even if the phone were offline and has no connectivity at all. And you can see it's been set up to represent exactly the same sort of collection events that we used in RSpace. It's asking for the same kinds of information: the field site, information about the containers that the stuff was loaded into, and then ultimately information about things like the chain of custody. And then once the user is able to return to the a location where there's internet connectivity, they can go ahead and sync this. And then what will happen is once they click a single sync button, those details will then be seamlessly and automatically transmitted back to our space via the API. And these values will be automatically populated with the values that were collected in the field for maximum accuracy and minimum loss of data. It's also allowing you to immediately start integrating workflows, like the collection workflow, with the list of samples that are actually produced, both the immediate raw samples plus any derivative samples that can be added to this workflow using our list of materials feature. So as an example, if I wanted to add a series of algae samples to this, I can click on new sample. I can say I'd like to locate my samples that are already in the sample system. For brevity, we'll just say algae 1 here. And then for add items, I can either navigate or I can search for specific examples of samples that I know are in here somewhere. Let's go ahead and search for these. And now I can select whatever samples I want and say choose. And this will build for me a list of materials, which I can then save to this experiment. And I can add as many additional lists of materials as I want here, so that now I have lists of materials of specific sorts of things associated with this workflow.
So just to be clear, this doesn't exist, okay? Except in Sean's and my head. But seriously, we had dinner last night, and we think probably by I think the middle of the year, it's realistic that we'll have a beta out that people will be able to see. So this is the plan. So you can see that the focus is on enhancing FAIR through enhanced data capture in a fair way in the field, enhancing discoverability and association of the metadata and IGSNs with this. I haven't really talked much about IGSNs, and thanks to my own incompetence, we weren't able to incorporate a slide. We have a slide which shows you how IGSNs are going to appear in the RSpace interface, but I didn't manage to get that in time. And then, as was shown in the first presentation, enhanced availability by streamlining deposit of more and higher quality data in data repositories and registries. So just finally, let me mention that Xiaoli, who's coming up soon, and I are working on two things. One is this group, which we're delighted to see so many of you here and hope that many of you will get involved. And the second is that we also have an EOSC RDA grant, which is really similar in focus, which is called Enhancing Interoperability Through Use of PIDs and Research Platforms. And that project is really focused on IGSNs. And we're looking at incorporating IGSNs into RSpace, looking at the challenges. And we're looking at right now, beginning with two use cases, which are quite different and interesting. One is a geosciences group at the UIT, the University of the Arctic in Norway, which is really focusing on kind of the researcher perspective on IGSNs. And the second is working with Rothamsted Research, which is an agricultural research institute in England, looking at the institutional perspective, the institutional challenges in incorporating IGSNs into an entire institution's workflows. And the deliverable of that project that we're working on is to kind of take up a higher level. What lessons are we learning from these use cases, and to try to articulate some guidelines for other people who are going to be using tools and IGSNs. And I think that's it. So
Thank you. Thanks, Roy. So now, Xiaoli, although it seems to be going back now.
Yeah. Just double click past this one.
It's back. Okay, so this is what has 1 second to show this out. I want to correct the record, I think. I'm talking to the mic. I think in Sonia's very brief presentation, like she mentioned that some installation of DOI consortia installation share prefix. I want to correct that. The organizations all have the work with data side all have their own prefixes. In fact, each repository should have. Organizations that work with data sites have their own prefixes for the DOIs register. Don't have to share prefixes. This was like a small thing that caught by my data site colleagues that are listening. So we have to correct the record here. Okay, so
Which
the
is the
slide
correct
is
one?
ready.
Let me just share it online too. Give me 1 second.
Great. Yeah, I hope that, so thank you, everyone, all the presenters before me. I hope those examples were concrete enough for this room. We promised concrete examples in this group, and I'm really happy to see all of this, all of us in this room. And it's like a lot of interest in this topic. And I'm going to shift the gear a little bit because I'm with DataSite, and I'm the project lead of a small project called Implementing Fair Workflows. And in this project, we have a component in system integrations. So I'm going to talk from this project's perspective. So I'm not working on any of the implementations, but I'm working alongside the organizations that are putting in place integrations. So little bit on data side and the project. So people are generally quite familiar with data side. We're a global nonprofit membership organization working. Can I move this? Can I?
Yeah, you can. It's like a clap thing.
Okay, yeah, it's okay. Okay, got it. So we're a global nonprofit membership organization. We work with more than 2,700 repositories around the planet to provide DOIs for research output and resources, as well as IGSNs now. And about the project I'm leading with Helena, with a project director. This is a 3-year project funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And so in this project, we follow a team of researchers in the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics through a 3-year whole PhD project, basically, from the beginning of the conceiving of that PhD project to all the way through the planning, the experiment execution, to depositing data sets and submitting preprint, all of this entire process. So we roughly categorize this research project lifecycle into these 8 stages to kind of point out, expose the points where research can be identified, these identifiable chunks of research outputs, where they emerge and where they can be shared and be identified through the open scholarly infrastructure, through the open metadata systems. And on the one hand, we work with this research team, and on the other hand, as I mentioned, we work with all of these service providers that they have already are building these tools, these platforms that kind of float this work, these practices that we want our researchers to adopt. We tell them to do this and do that, where, how, right? This is like all the questions we get from the researchers. So in this project, we have project partners, DMP Tool and Maria is our partner. CDAR is a domain-specific metadata template authoring tool. The Dryad is our project partner, is a generic purpose data repository. Cronus Hub is a relatively new service that helps with open access manuscript publishing. And the ARDC is part of our project to figure out the implementation of project identifier RAID in the research lifecycle. So You see all these lines that I put between these systems. So there are some of the existing integrations that between them, and some of these lines represent integrations that we are implementing within the project. These dark lines are some integrations we're building, and this light blue lines are integrations that already exist, but through the project, we're enhancing them. We make them like more robust, more rich metadata that goes through these circuits. I'll go through each of this very briefly, but like all of these integrations have like these three main purpose. They identify objects, they create metadata, and enrich metadata on the basis when they have like basic metadata created. Like we emphasize in like metadata completeness and enrichment all the time. This is always a priority, and also capturing the connection between the objects. Identifying objects is not enough by itself. You also have to like surface these connections between them. So very briefly, this is how we do this in the project. In the beginning of the project, we work with organizations to agree on the integrations that we like to see, and how they, what type of PID features, functionalities they can like reasonably put in place, and can support the researchers' requirements. And then through the project, we work through all of the complications in this in the implementation. And so with CDAR, we agreed on for the CDAR platform is a quite new and researcher-driven tool. And we want to, through the project, register DOIs for CDAR templates. These are metadata templates that can be implemented in other platforms. And we want to extend the CDAR metadata template specification to support DOIs as first-class model component, and develop software to allow users to interactively request the generation of these DOIs. And in some work we've done so far is figuring out this, data pipeline, how the metadata flow through the system and end up with as a open metadata that can be reused. In terms of DMP tool, Maria have already given you some sneak peek, and so generally we're DMP tool working on this administrator dashboard to support reporting. What do we mean by this is that we can connect output back to the DMP tool on the metadata level, and also upload DMP and creation of DMP IDs as well through the API integrations. Very briefly, in terms of Chrome, we are working to enable data and DMP suggestion in the manuscript submission process via integration with the Data API, and also a Cronus Hub and prior integration to enable data deposition in the manuscript submission workflow. So basically, if you already have submitted data set, they will suggest you to submit it together with manuscript. If not, they will say you should probably go to Dryad and to do that. And the Dryad integration is to capture domain-specific metadata through adding a community endorsed metadata template, where when you are published in the process of publishing data set, Dryad will say, okay, there is an opportunity to attach a more refined, more domain-specific metadata through this. We have this couple of templates. You can choose that and put in more useful metadata for other scientists, and you can do that. And this is also through enabled through dataset DOI in that sense. And then with RAID, we're working to build interoperability into RAID itself by this is directly lift from Sean's writing. Is we plan to integrate this with RAID with all of these other DOIs that including the DOI and IJSN, and also Crossref DOI, ORCID ROAR, and instrument ID. And there's a 4-step process that is being implemented. So that was like very brief so-called interoperability or system integration that we have in this project. And the presenters before me also give you other examples. The point is, there are very varied use cases, and it can be very high level, it can be very specific, small integrations that enable like this data to flow through the circuits. And during the project midterm review, I asked our system integrators, what advice do you have for other platforms or tools that are considering PID-related integrations? And they gave pretty useful things that I want to share with this group. So first, from ARDC, PID services are difficult and expensive to build. Don't build new ones unless the case is compelling. I think this is a very understatement of the century. So yes, use existing PIDs when you can. And from Kronos Hub, only the obvious advice: ensure that your own platform supports the most relevant PIDs for all entities involved in the integration. Typically, this should include ORCID for the researchers, or Ringo for the organizations, Dataset DOI for dataset DMPs, Crossref DOI for articles and grants, ISNSN for the journals, ROR and Ringo for publishers, and ROR and Ringo and funder registration ID for funders. Very good set of examples of priority PIDs, as we say. From Dryad, the biggest issue the Dryad team has experienced in our various PID integration is challenges around stability and availability of PID services. This one is interesting, it's only come from experience. And there have been some instances where having a local copy of the PID registry can be helpful to ensure consistent uptime of the service. As newer PIDs mature and their service become more reliable, we expect that relying on API-based integrations will be more reliable. And this is a gold mine of advices. And I think everyone should take note or like take a picture of this. This comes from Brian at DMP Tool, and he categorizes it as working with PIDs maintained by an external system and PIDs in your application, inside your application maintains. And when you work with PID maintained by external system, you should verify systems retention access policy. Will it always be resolvable? For example, if not, how will your application handle that? And make sure that the PIDs are either URLs or at least have a namespace so that you can ensure uniqueness. For example, external system may use this ID, which is unique for that system, but not globally unique. And also make sure you understand how they manage versioning. This come up a lot. So some systems have different PIDs for each version, while others always return a latest version of the objects. And I think we're talking about the Zenodo here. If so like each system have their own kind of solution for that. And when you're working with PIDs in your application, that your application maintains, make sure you clearly document your retention access policy. Documentation is key, and in the project, we ask all the integrators to keep really good documentation. Make sure your PIDs are resolvable in the browser. Make sure you support versioning, and then clearly document how that works. And consider using a system like Crossref dataset to register a PID so that they become part of the larger DOI ecosystem. That's like goes without saying. So some observations and opportunities on my part as overseeing this project as it unfolds. First and foremost, obviously, highly varied use cases and different types of interoperability that we're talking about. It was when we were starting this group, we were talking about what kind of interoperability are we talking about really? And we think it's key to kind of pin this concept down one way or another, so that when we're talking about integration that enable interoperability, we know what we're talking about. And also resourcing and prioritization is like, obviously it's not just for this specific case. I think for all of our work that we do is important, because especially for interoperability between small research tools and platforms usually have small teams and competing priorities, and it's very hard to implement integration that is well, I guess I don't need to like go further into it. And also it's hard to estimate the workload in a way, because alignment between systems which can vary, can have varying levels of PID integration. So you kind of, if you want to build that pipe in between them, plump the data in between them, kind of have to have alignment first, and then that have to build into the workload. And usually you don't think about that when before you start the project. And you need more benchmark integrations to demonstrate what this will where the consideration needs to go and what this include really. And then engagement with researchers to raise awareness of these integrations are happening. They can this is possible to have these IGSN being inside of our space, and they can register IGSN within our space, like these things are happening, and also recruiting them for usability testings. These are also necessary and not necessarily easy. Some opportunities, and I think I have observed this, is that more stakeholders are paying attention to the implementation of PIDs and interoperability topics. So what I want to say by saying this is that there are grants out there. If you have that resourcing problems, look out. And I think initiatives like this gets support if you make a good case. And I think this is a good case. Interoperability and using open scholarly infrastructure is always a good case. And it's easier to build synergy because you're always like working collaboratively with different platforms and different organizations. And we have an active engaging community. Look at the people sitting next to you. This group of people, they're all like very interested in advancing in this regard. And also this type of implementation, however small, usually we expect them to have a long-term impact. So yeah, that was my last slide. I hope that we opened enough this space to invite discussions, questions, and yeah, any level of comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thanks, Xiaoli. I've been following everyone's presentations and just noting some things for our discussion, for the Q&A. And I just wanted to highlight some things like what Maria said really hit me, which is you worked with a group of people of these infrastructure providers to work through scenarios and interlink these services. And I think that was just a powerful scenario. And I think from the funder perspective, I know in our conversations, that map that you had, Xiaoli, like that is something we've been, we continuously talk about. How do we make sense of this space? And I think, that those have been sort of the discussions of like, how do we support key infrastructure, and support these sort of initiatives. So that's come up, like mapping the space, funding particular areas that are crucial for sort of interlinking, these services and tools and other things like that. The other thing I wanted to bring up too was, this is a good example of like, I know from my perspective, and I worked for a society and publisher, is it's very difficult. We had a project that was working through Crossref and DataCite to enable data citation. And I think working within sort of our traditional framework of publishing is another place that I might want to inspire here too, is to think of like what we can do as far as like, as opposed to like, what's the current system, and trying, like, how can we sort of imagine a system that is more flexible and suits our needs. And I think of this example with the TK labels and context information that that actually Sonia mentioned, which is some journals are, adding that context space, but it's still text, and I think of another example that's coming out of the notebooks project arena, which is called MIST, MYST. And it's sort of this flexible way of representing information. So, should we rethink also how how we sort of publish and communicate? Importing vocabularies, that's always hard. So I noted that. And then I do see some themes here, like which coming up, which is RAID came up, and the people from the RAID group are nodding, and Sean is like, oh no, am I gonna have to talk about RAID? But yeah, RAID is this new identifier for projects. And I see that, like, we talk about all this interlinking between all the outputs, and that it seems like we're all sort of coalescing there too. So Dataverse is interested in RAID. I know Zenodo just asked about RAID, and then, of course, you have Open Science, the OSF and the Center for Open Science. And this seems like maybe this could be a place where we coalesce and think about RAID together, like with this venue. And, again, demonstrating the impact. So, that came up through the slides too. Like, that's what that other group, the National Pitch Strategies, is also interested in. And we made a bet whether we have more people. So I have to check on that. But yeah, if anyone wants to start, those are just some of the themes to help us, discuss, have questions. Do we have a question up here in the front? Is it all right? Here. I don't know if I have.
I mean, I'm generally loud enough, but there are people online, so I will use the mic. Hello, I'm Adam Filesmore from JISC in the UK. I am PID wizard, no, the product specialist for persistent identifiers in the UK. I'm also part of the RAID working group. I'm just trying to throw all of my interest conflicts out straight away. And so I've got both a note for this community in the room and then a question. So for the community in the room, tools and kind of the things that we use are probably the closest space that a lot of kind of the associated things have to actual researchers and the kind of community that either are producing stuff or are at the end point of stuff, rather than like, talking to infrastructure or policy or at one remove. And a lot of those other communities need to hear from researchers. So you either have like product groups or you have like direct feedback. And so you're in a really unique place to be able to inform directly all the other things that are happening. And I'm not sure, quite how much you realize how important that is. When we're doing some of the PID work, one of the questions that we actually get asked from researchers is, why should I spend my time doing this, right? Even if we're working on just an identifier stuff, that can be up to 10% of their actual time entering that data in the first place. If we say, don't worry, it'll make your time better in the long run, they're still got to put all that in the first time. So, actually bringing those kind of perspectives is really important. The question is, if we're starting to work on putting these persistent identifiers into tools, why? What are the benefits that we're actually bringing to this? Right, so again, in the original report for the cost benefit analysis, great to see the Australian follow-up. We talked about, again, saving the researchers time. What are the benefits of putting these persistent identifiers in there? It's great to capture this information. It's great to have the structure in there. And thank you.
Does anyone from our panel want to address that? Yeah, oh, Sean.
So yeah, I see I need to get better at more shameless cross promotion. I'm also the product manager, product manager for RAID, although I'm more here with my FAMES and IGSN hat on. But no, thanks Adam for that. It turned out we didn't intend it this way, but with FAMES, one of our major lines of research quickly became socio-technical challenges to adoption, because we had the proposition that if you invest a month upfront in research design and then implementation of FAMES, we would save you a year in data cleaning. And what a difficult proposition that was for time poor researchers who perhaps discount future you know, a little bit more than they should. And I don't have a simple solution to that or anything, but we've just started really trying to work on doing things in the tool behind the scenes without the researchers having to know it. That like, you know, that if there's a vocabulary available that's a published vocabulary in their field that they're doing, we suggest that they do it, because then they don't have to type in all of the thing and make their own. And FAMES will handle hierarchical vocabulary. So we just say, okay, look, we got one for you. We can drop it in. And likewise with some of the metadata structures and things like that, because you can try to leverage that desire to minimize the upfront work by giving them things that are already done that sort of are 80% of what they need, and they'll normally go for it, because the only thing better than perfect is standardized.
We got Maggie.
I just want to make a comment on that, so in the project, we do actually track the time of researchers use to do the fair things that we want them to do. Anybody in the room have a guess how much time that take? We have been tracking for 1.5 years. Throw a number. 16%. Well, that's more than reality. Our reality, we have around like a little bit less than 10%. That's not significant, but we don't have a way to track the time you save down the way. So I just want to make that comment. We don't want to say, oh, doing this will save your time. Actually, it's actually spent your time, but this is the amount of time you spend. We don't know how much time it's going to save. There's some, yes.
So are you going to respond to
No. No, I'm.
Maggie's got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hear what
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm Maggie Hellstrom from ICOS, which is a European research infrastructure in the greenhouse gas and environmental science. So I think you've been talking a lot about individual researchers, and to me that's an extremely important stakeholder group here, but you also should consider the needs and the requirements of research producing in organizations such as research infrastructures, because we are also sort of major players here, and we often end up having, or let me say that in the last decade or so, we have developed our own systems because there were no available systems being provided by anyone else. And for us to, I mean, we're in principle positive to adjusting the way that we work to fit into a larger scheme because of interoperability and also saving our money. But we have it takes years to turn our super tankers around because our developers have to invest in changing everything that we have that is already working. Just one comment. So I think it's important to include research infrastructures and similar organizations also as sort of a reference group for your work, because otherwise we might end up with something that is workable for part of the research landscape, but not for major players. So that's just one thing. And secondly, to this question about having researchers engage with this. In Europe, we've been talking a lot about creating this new profession called data stewards. And I'm sure that there are similar things going on on a global sense. I just don't know exactly what they are called, but these are professionals who are trying to step in and fulfill loads of these different roles in giving guidance to researchers, but also understanding the bigger concept and how do different services and tools fit in together so that they can really help and make this whole research data management process as efficient as possible. So I'm really also wondering, when we're talking about this time spent, etc., shouldn't we rather also be trying to push our funders to fund positions so that maybe not at research group level, but at least at department level or faculty level, there should always be adequate support from these professionals who are not librarians, who are not information science specialists in that way, but are really being able to facilitate the process. Maybe that's not a question for this group, but I think it's something that really fits into the PID landscape as well, because there are so many misconceptions and misunderstandings about what persistent identifiers are. And I just wrap up with one comment we got in making a survey of some research infrastructures in the environmental area in Europe. One person said, we don't need persistent identifiers because we use DOIs.
We're doing well, Lee, don't worry.
Yeah, I'll follow up on both those points. So the first one, I think that I'd like to thank the first, I've forgotten your name, but for making the point that the tools providers are the ones who actually have to interface with the researchers, because you won't survive if you don't do that. So the whole project of something like incorporating an IGSN into a tool is done with a view to, it has to have a nice interface. It has to make it easy for the user, and that's a critical part of the design. Other things like, for example, enabling bulk operations to save time. So all these kind of things are important. So that's the first point. Yes. The second point is, why are we doing it? So this is really interesting. I mentioned we were working on two use cases. One is basically for researchers. The other is for the institution. And this is not me speaking. It's interesting. The main reason that both the individual research group and the institution are interested in making use of IGSNs is so that more people can discover their research. It's very simple. And this is not being imposed on them. This is something that they're embracing. They see IGSNs as a huge opportunity, but it's the same driver in both cases. So that, and as to your point about the research infrastructures, absolutely. I think our space is designed to interface with other research infrastructures. That's the whole point, really. So absolutely, the tools need to, what's a tool? What's an infrastructure? I mean, it's arbitrary as far as I'm concerned, but yes, they need to interoperate. So that's a critical part of it as well. So I agree with that too.
Do we have, okay, we have another question, but I'm thinking about your question, Maggie, about funders supporting data stewards. There's a variety of maybe answers, but yeah, next question.
Sorry, can I just say something about that? Because this experiment has been done. The German Research Foundation did offer extra money for large collaborative research projects to have data stewards, and there was very little response. This was money that was set apart from the research grant. They got money on top to do data management, and the uptake was very sluggish. So it's really also worthwhile investigating why there's this sluggish uptake.
Yeah, I think there's like a variety of things that it would take me to, there's a question waiting, so maybe we can get back to this data steward question, but yeah, I don't want to.
Okay.
If you have a question.
I'm Joachim Philipsen from Stockholm University RDM team. I have a question/comment for Shaoli. And I don't know how to frame it without sounding like, again, a grumpy old man, but here it goes. I mean, we all agree, and you stressed it several times that one of the great things with PIDs is to promote interoperability. At the same time, this project of yours at the Max Planck Institute, you described how you make it possible to actually pedify CEDAR metadata templates. Don't you think that will risk of proliferating metadata standards and in that way actually be detrimental to interoperability.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that comment. I think that's very thoughtful. On that hand, I think these are two separate questions. One question is the proliferation of metadata standards, and another is whether pedifying that is exacerbate or have any impact on that regard. I think we are aware of the problem that exists with or without PID. We do like to make new standards because we have too many standards and we want to make a unifying one, and then it becomes yet another new standard. And I want to and also I did emphasize that the CDAR template that we were working on, or any domain specific metadata we want to work on, or encourage the community to work on, needs to be endorsed by their community. And that's important. You can't just, in your own workshop and bang up something and then say, this is the metadata template for the neuroscience community. Well, the neuroscience community didn't hear about this. So that's what we did. We did workshops with experts. We have advisory groups, and we tested with researchers 4 or 5 rounds, and have a version 0.1 that we think we can start build on. So that's what the thing the work we've done on that. So I hope that give you some reassurance on your concerns.
I think I can, let me try and tackle this data steward. It's a good question, Maggie. I know in one case, we need sort of an initiative like the research software engineer, group to like elevate the role of data steward. That's one particular, you see some funders actually funding RC stuff now, and elevating the importance of software. From some of the funders, I can maybe speak from our perspective, there's sort of this community aspect of like supporting your community, and that's something we think about, and that role is certainly involved there, but it's not explicitly mentioned. At the funder itself, at Michael J. Fox Foundation, and aligning science around Parkinson's, we actually have data stewards. We have the data teams, like they're supported within the funding structure. So there's that case. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's sort of like 3 things that were, bobbing around in my head about like support for the data steward role, which I think we really, I think it was good that you called that out. But and there's one question I just wanted to, it's online, and I actually want Emmanuel to ask it if he's still there and can unmute. Is Emmanuel, you had a role about PIDs.
Yeah, sure. I'm here. So hope you can hear me. Yeah, so we've been trying to implement PIDs into our data systems, and I agree, it's a very promising technique. And practically, I think we're talking about the PID metadata, not about the PIDs per se, but the metadata that is behind the PIDs, which offers the great opportunities for interoperability. But we've been struggling with the roles of how to maintain them. I mean, it's easy, or not always easy, but often easy to define people who register the PIDs. But once they're registered, who maintains them? I mean, for ORCIDs, it's pretty clear. We all own our ORCIDs, so the libraries cannot change them. But how do we deal, and the libraries maintain the DOIs, for example, for the publications, but how do we deal with IGSNs, for example? How do we deal with instrument PIDs, with RORs, and these kinds? It's not clear who's responsible for the maintenance of the metadata. And I was wondering if anybody had tackled that, had already solved that, because we're really wrapping our hands around that, how we can deal with that. Thanks.
I'll pass it on to one of our panel members if they want to. Sean is like giving a look. But I'll say from the funder side, it's actually been a frustrating place for me lately, is that it's actually one of the notes I made about assertions. And, you know, I think Sean talked about annotation, or Rory talked about annotating this information. We actually have a lot of interest in this metadata being correct from the funder side of things. And yet it's not easy for us to, you know, to contribute back to the system at the moment. And so that's one particular frustrating point, because we want the research that we fund discoverable. You know, at least at Michael J. Fox Foundation, we want to get to a cure for Parkinson's disease as fast as we can. And that means everything has to be discoverable, you know, like that. We have to enable that. And so, you know, this has just been a frustration point for me, but I don't know if, Sean, were you giving a look?
No, just how we're wrestling with this with RAID now, because unlike an ORCID, a RAID, a project is a project's going to have many contributors, and who's responsible for what. You know, how do we and I guess our provisional approach is to, you know, go down the list of contributors, you know, that we're letting them flag like which contributors are sort of the correspondent, sort of like a corresponding author, and who's the lead on the project, and go through them that way. But you know, we can't force anybody to do anything. So it's and so we've got to set up incentives to try to make it worth their while. And talking to research offices and libraries, who in some cases may intermediate between researchers and RAIDs, how they're going to collect this information at their organizations. So I don't have a good solution. That's why I was giving Chris funny looks. So.
This is a frustrating look too. I thought it was a question over here early. Okay. Oh. Okay, but there was a. Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you. For me, the question is also about the uptake, because I think we have seen very nice integrations. But for me, those are very much point solutions, because it has been integrated in Dataverse, it has been integrated in Dryad or in RSpace. But if you want to support the uptake in a larger scale, then I think, do you work already with those different kind of developers so that they make it more core to their own technologies? Or do you provide more technical guidelines of that someone else can pick up, okay, from the integration work you already have done, to see, okay, how can I implement this in my own system, in my own tools? Because I think the usage of those kind of PIDs, certainly if you have new kind of PIDs, the uptake is always challenging and is always lacking. But the benefit if you have the uptake.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. So I kind of have to look at it from two sides. On the one side, if you have a point-to-point really useful integration or a set of integrations, then that becomes a solution which is adopted by more people. So that's useful. On the other point, to your point about trying to generalize it, there's two ways of doing that. One is through the use of open software and open APIs, and the other is through kind of like the project that I mentioned, the EOSC RDA project. The whole point is to try to publish some guidelines to help people who are doing this to, at least they won't have to start from scratch. They'll know what the challenges are. So, yeah.
There's another question online. It's going to be for you, maybe. But I don't know if Stephen, you want to ask your question, Stephen Richard, and I might hand the microphone back to.
Oh, that was more of a comment than a question, just as, in this question about policies for maintaining PIDs. We've been wrestling with trying to figure out how to identify research instruments like mass spectrometers and infrared spectrometers and things like that, where the researchers are always sort of upgrading things and changing components and things like that. And there's a real question of, when is it the same instrument on the one hand, and on the other hand, who has the ownership or the responsibility for maintaining the metadata associated with the instrument identifier? It becomes very unclear, and it's really been an impediment to trying to get a system like that working.
I was just going to say thank you. There's actually in case you're not aware, there's actually a group which is doing a lot of work on PIDs for instruments, the PID group, which is an RDA group. And I wonder if Tibor's here in the room, he could respond. But Tibor Kalman, the PIDs group at RDA, I would love to engage with you, I'm sure. So.
More commentary again, sorry. Hello, Adam Butmer. Adam, hi Rory. Again, so first I could ask a philosopher about a boat on the whole upgrading individual components thing. It's an existential question partly. So yeah, I think there's some really good guidance coming out of PIDs about exactly when it's an instrument and when it's upgrading. So yeah, absolutely. I know Mike's now gone, but I just want to say, absolutely, infrastructure and other stuff are important. It's just that from the point of view of someone who tried to engage various stakeholders in conversations, researchers have always typically been the hardest to get hold of. So I just, again, please elevate researchers' voices. From the point of view of how do we identify when we've got really good practice and then elevate that, the slightly less well-attended National PID Strategy Group is a great place to do that. And I'll say that for two reasons. By bringing all the different stakeholders together and having those discussions around the data and the frameworks that are being working together, identifying those and having the conversation between the stakeholders, what you're doing is you're building that kind of communal sense of the things that are working and elevating those things together. I'm saying elevating, well, I'm not sure. And then the other thing is that you're involving kind of the policy setters, right? And those things are getting together. From the point of view of individual things, I think from developing stuff and kind of the good practice that we're going around today, getting those kind of user stories and user journeys that you've been doing to develop stuff out and public and developing catalogs of them that we can share. And that's something that we're working on with Ray at the moment. Sorry, Sean, is something that I think we should be doing more of, right? I think we should be, and Shelby's very good, nodding lots, so thank you. Again, those kind of more kind of general purpose, not directly tied into the RESTful API makes these specific calls, but as a user, I need to do these things because I think really helps frame the kind of technical stuff, but in a way that we can do for communication, again, back to our stakeholders. And I think that helps with both getting our technical stuff off the ground and getting it, sorry to bring up the dirty word, funded, and getting those sustainability pieces in again and getting that buy-in again from our community.
We're getting towards the end here, and I just wanted to come back to that. There was a key question that I wrote down, which is ownership over metadata for PIDs. And I don't, this is maybe another dirty word, but GitHub has been an inspiration. Like the Git way of working has been an inspiration for me in science and how we work. And I think like the way that our current system works is very monolithic to some extent. Like you have to go to this place and you have to like work with these people to submit this information, and you have to go through a process, while Git is just like flexible, and you can actually create, you create pull requests, you can create issues, and it's sort of this open, transparent way of working with community metadata and data. And so, at least from my perspective, when I was working on PIDs from the funder side of things, I really hoped for that, like the way to assert claims and metadata on top of the information that was there, which was not possible. You have to talk to someone, become a member, do all this. And it's a lot of friction that we add in our system. And maybe in a way I'm encouraged by some of the, I don't know if this is public, but I've been told that Crossref is working on a way to assert you know, claims or metadata on top of, you know, the record. So like, I think they call it manifold or something like that, but that was of interest, you know, like, but that's where I hope, you know, we end up. And I don't know if anyone wants to have the last question or comment, but we're 1 minute towards the end. So thank you. And if you have any other sort of feedback or questions, send them our way. We don't have an email, but I guess it's on the page, so you can reach out to us through the RDA group page and let us know. We're looking at things to focus on for the next group. So thanks. And yeah, thanks to everyone that came and the co-chairs and our speakers. So thanks.